Hello, and welcome to another book festival. This festival is called Libris, and we are very happy today to meet Avni Doshi, a very promising young writer coming from India, but now calling from Dubai. We'll be talking today about her lovely book, Burnt Sugar. Girl in White Cotton was the original name. The book was published in India a couple of years ago, but it was republished, and now under this name it came to Romania as well. The Romanian title is Zahăr ars, Burnt Sugar, quite a feat for a lot of us who love sweets. Hello, Avni, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm very happy to be talking to you and to be admiring the lovely bookshelves behind you. Just before we start, tell me what your favorite book is and what books you have behind.
Oh,
behind in all possible senses, meaning the books that formed you.
Well, literally behind on my bookshelf, it's actually a mishmash of so many things because after I got married to my husband, we combined our bookshelves. So it's a bit of a mess, and it's many things I haven't read, but many things I hope to read. In terms of the books that formed me, there are so many. I would say that I really started my love affair with literature, reading a lot of classics. I think I started with Jane Austen and Henry James and Tolstoy, and that's really where I began. And I believe it's from that place that I actually wanted to start writing. I came to contemporary fiction much later. In terms of some of my favorite novelists, Rachel Cusk is one of them, Ottessa Moshfegh, to name a few, Alexandra Kleeman, Muriel Spark. Mm-hmm. So there are many. It's hard to just pick one who I love.
I'm happy with the one you mentioned, especially since I did an interview with Ottessa some time back, and also the classics. And I wanted to ask you from the very beginning, why Burnt Sugar? Because this is such a sweet name for such a great book. It's so strong. And I wanted to say it's terrible, but in a very good way. It's haunting me, and it's the story of the relationship between a mother and a daughter, Tara and Antara. I thought of Gog and Magog, Papini's antagonism when I read this, because the relationship is very far from being a sweet one. So why Burnt Sugar, and how did you get to this idea of writing about this eternal and eternally complicated theme of the relationship between mothers and daughters?
Well, the title Burnt Sugar wasn't one that we started out with. As you mentioned, in India, it was first called Girl in White Cotton. That had been my working title for about 7 years. So through the process of writing the book, I thought of it as Girl in White Cotton, but the book changed so much. And when I finally sold the book in the UK, my editor said, "Why Girl in White Cotton? It doesn't seem to capture the darkness in the book." And I explained to her that in the context of India, particularly Hindu India, this idea of white cotton has a meaning, has a different reference. White cotton is the fabric of mourning. It's the fabric of asceticism, of grief. Widows wear white cotton when they're grieving. And so it has this kind of dark, this kind of contradictory dark quality to it. And my editor pointed out that in the West, that meaning is not immediately apparent. When you think of a girl in white cotton, you think of just a very pure, simple, happy girl, perhaps even a bride at her wedding. So keeping that in mind, and that the title wouldn't immediately make sense to a Western audience, we thought that it might work to change the title for the rest of the world. And we came up with Burnt Sugar because, of course, if you've read the book, you know that sugar plays a very central role in the way the plot eventually unfolds. And burnt sugar, we thought about that sweetness and darkness, the sweet and the bitter, that kind of sticky, intense quality of caramel. There was an image in our minds of sugar simmering on a stove and almost boiling over. And really something that's at the heart of the novel, which I think Burnt Sugar encapsulates, is this idea of the domestic monster. So the idea that something in our domestic lives, something very banal, something very everyday and normal, can take on this strange, uncanny, disturbing, dark, even menacing quality, which I think is something that emerges in the relationship between mother and daughter as you progress in the reading of the book.
That's very interesting also, because sugar is something which is both good and bad. And so you see, I invented the word good. It's bad and good at the same time. And it's also a symbol of the relationship, because it's sweet, but it's also burned. And I love the way that you talked about we, because this reinforces the role of the editor in the choice of the title and in the choice of the promotion of the book. Let's not forget that editors are very important when dealing with such choices.
Yeah.
Now, once you open the book, you find the motto and the first line, the first phrase. And I want to draw a parallel here and ask you about this. I know you've been asked before, but it's very interesting also because it's a very strong start for the book. You say, actually, the character says, I would lie if I'd say that my mother's unhappiness never caused me pleasure. This is my translation. I'm reading from the Romanian version of the book, but I think I'm not far from the original. And I thought of Tolstoy's beginning, the famous beginning of Anna Karenina, with all the happy families are similar, the same, and all unhappy families are unhappy, each in its own way. And I thought about this because of the word unhappiness. It's quite cruel what she's saying, but also it's very true. So I don't know how many women and how many daughters would have the guts to admit this directly, that they like to see their mother in pain, either physical or else. And also because the mother in the book is suffering from a very crippling disease, the Alzheimer's disease, and that makes memory, which is also a central point of your book, very, very difficult to keep. How did you juggle all these things? And what can you tell me about the relationship between the unhappy families, as Tolstoy put it, and this unhappy family, particularly this family made up of a mother and a daughter?
Yeah, so the sentence in the original is, I would be lying if I said my mother's misery has never given me pleasure. And, you know, for me, I knew that I wanted the first sentence to be very strong. I knew I wanted it to kind of contain some information about the character, about the narrator, about what kind of story it was. And when I began writing the draft that would eventually become the published work, which was actually the 8th draft, so it was very deep into the process of thinking about this book, I knew that this was the sentence that I wanted to start with, because I could see the shape of the entire novel in the first sentence. So I would say that you know, it is very complicated, this particular relationship, and there is a lot of darkness. I think one of the reasons that it's very difficult for Anthara to, in fact, care for her mother, because as you mentioned, her mother is aging, her mother has dementia. And, you know, I think at least I am of an age now where, you know, I'm almost 40 years old and my parents are getting older, and it's a moment, I think, in one's life where you have to shift the way in which you understand your role as child. suddenly the role of the child is one of caretaker. Suddenly you go from being the child to parent. And in a strange way, you are almost parenting your parent. And for Antara, this is particularly tricky because her mother never truly cared for her or looked after her when she was growing up. And so that, I think, makes it particularly difficult when she's faced with this kind of illness that that's kind of taking over her mother, and when she sees the long stretch in front of them of dealing with that. I don't know why I chose, I'm not sure I chose it. In a sense, I think it chose me. I don't know. I suppose all novelists have different experiences. I often find my subjects choose me rather than me having so much control. It usually is a kind of obsession or a kind of possession that overtakes me, and I just am compelled to follow certain characters or certain stories.
Mm-hmm. What would you say the main theme of the book is?
The main theme of the book, oh God, that's really difficult. I suppose this idea of the domestic monster is very central to the novel. Memory, I think, is, of course, very important. Memory has been very important for me as a theme throughout my life. It's come up in various ways. Even when I studied art history, I am an art historian by training. And so a lot of the exhibitions that I curated, the central focus was actually around these questions of the archive and memory and archival violence as well. And so memory is definitely a theme for me. And I think a question of also belonging, perhaps this idea of intergenerational trauma. You know, in the characters of the husband and the mother-in-law, you see this idea of, you know, the immigrant and this idea of the diaspora. And so I tried to explore those ideas as well.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting because this is a recurrent theme, the relationship between the husband of the daughter and the mother-in-law. It's always a fight. There's always a fight in there, but now the fight is doubled because the daughter is fighting her mother and the mother is fighting the daughter, and it's all very complicated. I didn't have this question prepared, but now that you said that you are an art historian, I have to ask you, if you were to compare your book to an artistic current or to a painter, classical or contemporary, what would that be? Or who would that be?
Oh my goodness, that's a really interesting and hard question. I
just came up. It's like, yeah.
You know, I guess, oh gosh, this is going to sound very, very, very presumptuous.
Go ahead.
Because she's such a legend, but I will say that, you know what, I will say that always in the back of my mind is the work of Louise Bourgeois. Mm-hmm. So, or LB, as she's known to those who adore her work. And I think, you know, her interest in memory, her interest in the complicated relationship between mother and daughter, the dark relationship between mother and daughter, and this kind of menacing, uncanny quality that a domestic space can take on. That's a kind of consistent theme in her work. You know, she's forever returning to those kind of dinner table scenes with her parents. She has a fascinating work called The Tangerine, which she relates back to a story when she was young, where her father would sit at the dining table and peel a tangerine, and you know, the central core of the tangerine would form a kind of male member on this shape of the tangerine. And she would say, oh, look how beautiful this tangerine is, so much more beautiful than my daughter. as a kind of insult that her daughter was not born a son. And so, and she still kind of, you know, even later in her life, she would talk about that story and cry, and she was forever haunted, I think, and forever in a state of trauma based on her childhood. And I think in a way that's a similar experience to what Antara has. She's kind of constantly reliving her childhood traumas in the present, so that the kind of distance between the past and present doesn't feel like any distance at all. But I will not go so far as to say I think I am in any way comparable to her, to Louise Bourgeois, but I will say that she is very inspirational to me, and she's always kind of in the back of my mind.
That's true, and we'll let the readers decide. Now I have two questions based on what she said. First of all, concerns food. Food is very present. Food is very important for our cultures, for your culture, for my culture. And in general, food is a sign of nurture between a mother and a daughter. And there's this tension because mothers are trying to force their children to eat. And when you rebel against this, and especially as a daughter, when you refuse the food your mother is offering, it's kind of the utmost rebellion against the relationship with your parent. How did you put this into the book? And food is also something very sensuous, but the sensuality of the title as well is working against itself. It's a sign of darkness, as you were saying. Is food a symbol of the relationship between mother and daughter? If people would sit down and eat properly, dinner, for instance, as you mentioned, this theme, and a mother and a daughter would bond over dinner, would that be a cure for this distress, for the relationship which is going wrong between them?
That's so interesting. You know, for me, I didn't think of that at all. For me, the food is a kind of vehicle that carries this intergenerational trauma and passes it down from mother to daughter. Food is a kind of, for me, a metaphor in that way. Cooking, food, the kitchen, the domestic space, the preparation of the food, for much of, you know, recorded history was the work of women. And in the context of India, you know, many recipes, many styles of cooking would be passed down from mother to daughter, from mother to daughter. And in a way, I think food in the novel contains not just the pain and the difficulties of the mother and the daughter, but the pain and the difficulties of the mothers and daughters that came before. It's interesting to think, you know, we are women living today, and we are ambitious, and we have dreams, and we have plans. But I often think about the women who have come before us, who probably also had dreams and desires that they could never carry out, or perhaps never even speak of. And I often think of that as a kind of hunger. And I wonder about that hunger and how that hunger has been passed down, and how that hunger exists even in us, even in me, like the hunger of the women that have come before me, that was never satiated, that was never, that never reached a kind of fruition, how that is very alive, I think, almost in a, perhaps even in my DNA in a way. And I think that's, to me, food kind of plays into that idea and that metaphor of that hunger that is passed down and that continues to move and produce desire within us.
And also there's the hunger for love and for the maternal love and for that type of recognition a daughter almost never gets from her mother. This seems to be a topic which is universal, because I was thinking about this, about the cure. Is there a possible remedy for the relationships between mothers and daughters, or are all daughters bound to the Electra complex and all mothers bound to be forgetful, as your character is forgetful in all possible ways in what their daughters are concerned.
I guess I don't like to generalize about all mothers and all daughters. I think each mother and daughter relationship kind of contains its own particularities and is formed under various kinds of pressure. So it's difficult to say. I think the only cure is really if both parties take responsibility, accountability, if they both become aware to some degree of what they are projecting on the other person and are able to then kind of withdraw that projection back into themselves. There's a way in which I'm sure in Tara's case, she's projecting certain things on her daughter that make it almost impossible to be a nurturing parent to her daughter. And, you know, and then Antara, you know, has to kind of suffer because of that. So I think it's difficult. I think it's, you know, the wounds of childhood, I think then end up taking a lifetime to heal, but I wouldn't say it's impossible.
Let's hope so. Well, one final question, because we're running out of time and the debate is so interesting. I would love to hear more from you. And maybe you'll come again as our guest as long as you keep writing your books. So this was your first book and it was a huge success and it was nominated for the Booker Prize, which is quite an honor for a first book. How did you feel about this? And do you think that now that you've got this nomination, that your book is successful in India, in the UK, all over the world, this is going to be a quiet road, let's say, the next book and the next book, or are you just thrilled about what's going to come and unsure of how they will be received by the audience? Of course, this is a devil's advocate question because I'm pretty sure they are all going to be very successful and we are going to publish them and read them, most importantly.
Thank you so much. It was a real shock to me. I have no background in creative writing. I don't have any powerful mentors. I was really writing in the dark, teaching myself to write purely out of my passion for reading. So when the book began to receive critical acclaim and then was nominated for the Booker, I was completely shocked about it. And it was a huge honor. And I think I'm still, to this day, digesting it. I think it's hard to wrap your head around something like a Booker nomination. But I don't think the uncertainty around making art ever goes away, whether you achieve success or whether you don't. I think there's a way in which expectations are kind of complicated. You know, they can kind of paralyze a person as well. So I'm, you know, I think one of the most powerful things when we when I begin writing any project is to come with a sort of beginner's mind and to try and forget what I've done before and to be curious and to be open to learning. I like to constantly be taking different kinds of classes. At the moment, I'm taking an archaeology class, I'm taking a psychology class, all virtually, all online. And I'm totally out of my depths. I don't know anything that I'm studying. I feel like a true beginner. And I think that's actually a really wonderful place to be when I start a new book project. So I'm hoping to have that kind of sense of beginning and of wonder and curiosity as I start the new book as well.
And also of humility towards the magic of literature and the magic of books. And that's what you said, is that's food for thought, and to keep the food theme alive till the end of the interview. So thank you so much, Avni Doshi, for this lovely talk and for the book. Again, Zahăr, burnt sugar in English, Zahăr in Romanian. And I look forward to meeting you again, maybe in person in Bucharest.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.